Hello, in this part I will show you how to set GI and light for our interior scene. First, let's create a V-Ray dome light. Now turn it off. Let's clean our material editor and now add a V-Ray HDR map. Now I will pick an HDR I downloaded from the openfootage.net site. You may download the smaller one. It will be enough to lead our scene. Change your mapping type to spherical. Decrease the gamma to 0.9 to increase its contrast a bit. I will change the render multiplier to 42. Now let's select our V-Ray light and copy the HDR to the texture slot as an instance. Open your environment and effects window and also paste your HDR as an environment map. Now we will have to display our HDR as a background. For this, use Alt-B shortcut key. Now let's turn your viewport so we can see our sun. Now we can decrease the overall multiplier of the HDR to make sun more visible. Displaying HDR map in viewport background in 3D Studio Max has a small bug. If you will preview HDR in the Photoshop, you may notice that these trees are on the right side from the sun and in our viewport are from the left. So you have to check flip horizontally in our HDRI settings. Now let's create a standard target direct light. This will be our sun. Now we have to match it with our HDR sun perfectly. So let's change the perspective to very wide view and turn around our V-Ray dome light. Now just adjust the position of the direct light so it matches our sun perfectly. Okay, this looks good enough. Select both the target light and its target and now link it to our dome light. Now, when we will rotate our V-Ray dome light, it will automatically rotate the sun. Now, to make it work properly, we also have to link our HDR rotation to our V-Ray dome light rotation. This can be achieved using wire parameters. So let's right-click, wire parameters, transform, rotation, Z rotation, link it to itself, and now choose object, texture, and horizontal rotation. Click to connect our parameters. And last step is to add a minus before our Z rotation. Click on update, and this will link rotation of our dome light to rotation of the HDR texture. Okay, let's change our overall multiplier back to 1. Now we can disable our sun, because in most takes in this scene I will be using only the HDR light. This setup is extremely helpful, because right now our sun position is indicated by direct light. So let's rotate our V-Ray dome to make our sun lit the scene from the angle that we want. Okay, now when our HDR is set up, let's go to our V-Ray settings. First, let's make sure that you are using Gamma 2.2. Go to Preferences and enable your Gamma correction. In bitmap files, change input Gamma to 2.2. Now go to our V-Ray settings and enable GI. First, I like to change my saturation of the GI to 0.8. This will reduce a color bleeding effect a little. First, we have to set our light cache. So change our primary and secondary bounces to the light cache. First, let's reduce subdivision value to 500 and adjust number of passes correspond to your processor threads. In my scenes, I'm also using light cache for gloss rays to speed my rendering a little. Let's also enable show calculation phase. Make sure you have your frame buffer turned on. In the color mapping setup, let's change Gamma to 2.2 and enable subpixel mapping and our clamp output, but change the value to the 2. It will give you possibility to save an EXR image with full float. I will also increase my filter size to the 1.6 to reduce sharpness. In the color mapping time, let's change linear multiply to Reinhardt and decrease the burn value to 0.3. The typical linear light color mapping usually will give us too much burned out areas, and Reinhardt with 0.3 works for me the best in the interior scenes. Okay, before first rendering, let's also disable filtering in our light cache. Now press render. Okay, so here is our first render with only light cache. The quality is very poor. First of all, our samples are definitely too big, and the contrast between the samples is also too big. Let's go back to our settings and increase subdivisions to 1000. After increasing the subdivisions, you may notice that the contrast between samples is now much better. This means that we have much more information in the samples. Okay, for now, let's stop with the V-Ray light settings because we have to make the most important step with lighting in interior scene. We'll create V-Ray lights in our windows with the skylight portal option turned on. Also remember to check simple type of the sky portal. This will ignore any object that is behind the window, and it will put strength and the color of the HDR directly inside the room. Also make sure that you have really increased the subdivisions of the V-Ray light, because default 8 subdivisions is definitely not enough to produce a clean, noise-free image. I set my subdivisions to 80. Okay, so let's create the first light, and in the exclude options I will exclude the glass object, so it doesn't cast any shadows. Now let's copy this light as an instance. And now let's proceed with creating lights on the other side of the building. Okay, when our lights are ready, let's create a new render. As you may have noticed, on the left side I have opened my render history window. You can enable it by pressing the H letter on the bottom part of our V-Ray frame buffer window. Now we can compare previous renders by clicking Set A and Set B. Now we can see that the difference in the sample quality is very dramatic. This is because our V-Ray sky portals now give us much more information about the light directly into the room. Okay, let's make another step. Increase our subdivisions to 1600 and decrease the sample size to 0.007. Okay, let's compare our two last renderings. The render time has doubled, but decreasing the sample size gave us much more detail in the scene. Okay, light cache setup is ready. Now we will change our primary bounces to irradiance. First, let's add filtering to our light cache to blend the samples together. In irradiance settings, let's just change the high preset to medium, and we'll just increase subdivisions a little. The rest of the options may stay untouched. Okay, let's render the new image. The render time has risen to 16 minutes, but the quality is very good. We have all the details visible, including the spaces between the floorboards and amazing shadows. There are still some little bugs visible in the scene, like below the shelf in the kitchen or some dots on the curtain. But all in all, this quality is enough to produce a high quality image. Now let's change the resolution to Full HD and increase our light cache subdivisions. Next, go to settings and decrease the adaptive amount as well as noise threshold. Also, increase the minimum samples in the scene to 14. These settings will help us to really reduce the noise in the shadows. Okay, let's check our full resolution render with these new settings applied. Okay, so here is our full resolution render with the final settings. The image looks very nice and clean, there are no bugs and no noise. Okay, let's start with another light setup that will include our direct light. As for the camera settings, these are just default camera settings with the horizontal gas option and increased brightness with f-number set to 6. A very light yellow-green color correction. I'm also having my vignetting turned off. I'm always adding vignetting later in post-production. First of all, let's rotate our V-Ray dome so it will actually lead the scene from the correct angle. I want the shadows to be cast on the wall that is seen from the camera. In my scene, I have some very proxy trees that are from Evermotion collection. They are hidden, so let's unhide them first. These trees are in my scene only to cast shadows from the target direct light. In the object parameters, I have two options turned off: visible in camera and visible in reflection refraction. These options are turned off because I don't want them to be visible in my renderings, because it would really slow down the rendering. Okay, our sun is turned off, so let's turn it on. Also enable V-Ray shadows. I will increase the multiplayer to 12 and change its color to bright orange. Let's also enable some area shadows and increase their radius to 25 centimeters. We also have to increase subdivisions of the shadows to 32. Make sure that you have your hotspot radius set up correctly, so the light radius covers the whole scene. Okay, let's change our resolution to 1000 and decrease our settings so the render is faster. Let's go to our render elements and go to our very light select pass. Now I will add my sun to this pass. This pass is really helpful in the post-production later, because we can increase the strength of our sun by blending this pass in the screen mode. Okay, let's select only a region to preview if our trees will cast proper shadows. Okay, so as you can see, the leaves of the trees are creating very nice small shadows. Go to our passes. Let's select our sun layer. This will show us only the sunlight. Okay, setup for this camera is ready.